Fucking hell. Yo, how you doing? Uh, sorry I've been, kind of, yeah, I've been, very unprofessional these last couple of days. Sorry I had to cancel stream my last, 2 days. Well, for the first time, I just kind of felt dead. I didn't realize it, because as soon as I, like, sat down, I, passed out. So that's not good. And yesterday I was gonna stream, but I my time management was shit, and I had to finish an essay for class, and it took longer than I thought. And fortunately, school comes first. So yeah, but that's my fault. I'm very sorry about that, honestly. Uh, but I'm here now. I'm here now. Actually adhering to my schedule. Um, Sorry if I'm slightly late. It's actually not that bad. But yeah, I took a nap just because I was feeling kind of dead. But yeah, I'm okay. I'm getting through it. Let me just have some water. Let me hydrate slightly. That's all right. Okay, okay. But yeah. So we're just gonna finish this motherfucker today. These are the last 5 chapters. It's how long do I? How many chapters? Sorry, I'm seeing how many pages I'd be reading through. Okay, it won't be that bad. At least I don't think it'd be that bad. Wait, it shouldn't be that bad. I don't think. No, no, it'll be fine. It'll be. 1 second. I'm just checking something. Ah, bloody hell. Ah, god damn it. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. Um, why is the last chapter like 40 fucking pages? It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Seriously, like it seems like chapter 24. It's like it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. You know what? Yeah, no reason to pussyfoot around this shit. Let's get into it. Let's actually finish this motherfucker. Yeah. We're fine. We're fine. We're fine. Okay, let's get into it. Alright. Chapter 20. I sat one evening in my laboratory. The sun had set, and the moon was just rising from the sea. I had not sufficient light for my employment, and I remained idle. In a pause of consideration of whether I should leave my labor for the night or hasten its conclusion by an unremitting attention to it, as I sat, a train of reflection occurred to me which led me to consider the effects of what I was doing now. 3 years before, I was engaged in the same manner, and had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart and filled it for with bitter remorse. I was now about to form another I was about to form another being of whose dispositions I was alike ignorant. She might become 10 times more malignant than her mate, and delight, for its own sake, in murder and wretchedness. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not, and she who, in all probability, was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with the compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other, the creature who already loathed its own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She might she also might turn with disgust from him to the superiority beauty of man. She might quit him and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species, even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World. Yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the dame would thirst would be children, and a race of devils be propagated upon the earth who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition curious and full of terror. Had I a right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? I had before been moved by the sophisms of the being I had created. I had been struck senseless by his fiendish threats, but now, for the first time, the wickedness of my promise burst upon me. I shuddered to think that future ages might curse me as their pest, whose selfishness had not hesitated to buy its own peace at a price, perhaps of the existence of the whole human race. I trembled, and my heart failed within me, when, looking up, I saw by the light of the moon the daemon of the casement. A ghastly grin wrinkled his lips as he gazed on me. When I sat fulfilling the task which he had allotted to me, yes, he had followed me in my travels. He had loitered in the forest, hid himself in caves, or taken refuge in wide desert heaths, and he now came to mark my progress and claim the fulfillment of my promise. As I looked on him, his countenance expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. I thought with a sensation of madness on my promise of creating another like to him, and trembling with passion, tore to pieces the thing which I was engaged. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended for happiness, and with a howl of devilish despair and revenge, withdrew. I left the room, locked the door, made a solemn vow in my own heart never to resume my labors, and then, with trembling steps, I sought my own apartment. I was alone. None were near to me to dissipate the gloom and relieve me from the sickening oppression of the most terrible reveries. Several hours passed, and I remained near my window, gazing on the sea that was almost motionless, for the winds were hushed, and all nature reposed under the view of the quiet moon. A few fishing vessels alone specked with water, and now and then the gentle breeze wafted the sound of voices as the fishermen called to one another. I felt the silence, although I was hardly conscious of its extreme profundity, until my ear was suddenly arrested by the paddling of oars near the shore, and a person landed close to my house. A few minutes after, I heard the creaking of my door, as if someone endeavored to open it softly. I trembled from head to foot. I felt a presentiment of who it was, and wished to rouse one of the peasants who dwell in the cottage not far from mine, but I was overcome by the sensation of helplessness, so often felt in frightful dreams, when you in vain endeavor to fly from an impending danger, and was rooted to the spot. Presently, I heard the sound of footsteps along the passage. The door opened, and the wretch whom I dreaded appeared. Shutting the door, he approached me, and said with a smothered voice, "You have destroyed the work on which you began. What is it you intend? Do you dare break your promise? I have endured toil and misery. I left Switzerland with you, crept along the shores of the Rhine, among its willow islands and over the summits of its hills. I have dwelt many months in the heaths of England and among the deserts of Scotland. I endured incalculable fatigue, cold, and hunger. Do you dare destroy my hopes? Be gone! I do break my promise. Never will I create another like yourself, equal in deformity and wickedness. Slave! I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey! The hour of my irresolution is past, and the period of your power is arrived. Your threats cannot move me to do an act of wickedness, but they confirm me in my determination of not creating you a companion in vice. Shall I, in cool blood, set loose upon the earth a daemon whose delight is in death and wretchedness? Begone! I am firm, and your words will only exasperate my rage. The monster saw my determination in my face, and gnashed his teeth in impotence of anger. Shall each man, cried he, find a wife for his bosom, and each beast have his mate, and I be alone? I had feelings of affection, but they were requited by detestation and scorn. Man, you may hate, but beware. Your hours will pass in dread and misery, and soon the bolt will fall, which must ravish from you the happiness forever. Are you to be happy while I grovel in the intensity of my wretchedness? You can blast my other passions, but revenge remains revenge. Revenge remains. Revenge, henceforth, dearer than the light or food. I may die, but first you, my tyrant and tormentor, shall curse the sun that gazes on your misery. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with the willingness of a snake, that I may sting with its venom. May you repent of the injuries you inflict. Devil, cease, and do not poison the air with these sounds of malice. I have declared my resolution to you, and I am no coward to bend beneath my words. Leave me be. I am inexorable. Inexorable. It is well. I go. But remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night. I started forward and exclaimed, Villain! Before you sign my death warrant, be sure that you yourself safe. I would have seized him, but he eluded me and quitted the house with precipitation. Precipitation. Okay. In a few moments, I saw him on his boat, which shot across the water with an arrowy swiftness, and he was soon lost among the wave. All was silent again, but his words rang in my ears. I burned with rage to pursue the murderer of my peace, and precipitate him into the ocean. I walked up and down my room hastily and perturbed, while my imagination conjured up 1,000 images to torture and sting me. Why had I not followed him and closed with him in mortal strife? But I had suffered him to depart, and he had directed his course towards the mainland. I shuddered to think who might be the next victim of sacrifice to his insatiate revenge. And then again, I thought of his words, I will be with you on your wedding night. That, then, was the period fixed for fulfillment of my destiny. In that hour, I should die, and at once satisfy and extinguish his malice. The prospect did not move me to fear, yet, when I thought of my beloved Elizabeth, of her tears and endless sorrow, when she should find her lover so barbarously snatched from hers, tears, the first I had shed for many months, streamed from my eyes. I resolved not to fall myself before the enemy, at least not without a bitter struggle. The night passed away, and the sun rose from the ocean. My feelings became calmer, and it may be called calmness when the violence of rain sinks into the depths of despair. I left the house, the horrid scene of the last night's contention, and walked on the beach of the sea, which I almost regard as an insuperable barrier between me and my fellow creatures. Nay, a wish that such should prove the fact stole across me. I desire that I might pass my life on that barren rock, wearily, it is true, but uninterrupted by any sudden shock of misery. If I returned, it was to be sacrificed or see those whom I most loved die under the grasp of a demon who I created. I walked about the isle like a relentless spectre, separated from all we loved and miserable in separation. When it became noon and the sun rose higher, I lay down on the grass and was overpowered by a deep sleep. I had been awake the whole of the preceding night. My nerves were agitated and my eyes inflamed by watching and misery. The sleep into which I now sank refreshed me, and when I awoke, I again felt as if I belonged to a race of human beings like myself, and began to reflect upon what had passed, with great composure. Yet still the words of the fiend rang in my ears like a death knell. They appeared in like a dream, yet distinct and oppressive as a reality. The sun had far descended, and I still sat on the shore, satisfying my appetite, which had become ravenous, with an oaten cake, when I saw a fishing boat land close to me, and one of the men brought me a packet. It contained letters from Geneva, one from Clairvaux entreating me to join him. He said that he was wearing away his time fruitlessly where he was, that letters from the friends he had formed in London desired his return to complete the negotiation that had entered for his Indian enterprise. He could not any longer delay his departure, but as his journey to London might followed, even sooner than he now conjectured by his longer voyage, he entreated me to bestow as much of my society on him as I could spare. He besought me, therefore, to leave my solitary isle and to meet him at Perth, that we might proceed southwards together. This letter, in a degree, recalled me to life, and I determined to quit my island at the expiration of 2 days. Yet, before I departed, there was a task to perform, on which I shuddered to reflect. I must pack my chemical instruments, and for that purpose I must enter the room which had been the scene of my odious work, and I must handle those utensils, the sight of which was sickening to me. The next morning, at daybreak, I summoned sufficient courage and unlocked the door to my laboratory. The remains of the half-finished creature whom I had destroyed lay scattered on the floor, and I almost felt as if I had mangled the living flesh of a human being. I paused to collect myself and then entered the chamber. With trembling hand, I conveyed the instruments out of the room, but reflected that I ought not to leave the relics of my work to excite the horror and suspicion of the peasants. I accordingly put them into a basket, and with a great quantity of stones, and laying them up, determined to throw them into the sea that very night. And in the meantime, I sat upon the beach, employed in my cleaning and arranging in my chemical apparatuses. Nothing could be more complete than the alteration that had taken place in my feelings since the night of the appearance of the demon. I before regarded my promise with a gloomy despair as a thing that, with whatever consequences, must be fulfilled. But I now felt as if a film had been taken from my eyes, and that I for the first time saw clearly. The idea of renewing my labors did not for one instant occur to me. The threat I had heard weighed on my thoughts, but I did not reflect that a voluntary act of mind I could avert it. I had resolved in my own mind to create another like a fiend I had made would be an act of the basest and most atrocious selflessness. I banished from my mind every thought that could lead to a different conclusion. Between 2 and 3 in the morning, the moon rose, and I then, putting my basket aboard the little skiff, sailed out about 4 miles from the shore. The scene was perfectly solitary, and a few boats were returning towards land, but I sailed away from them. I felt as if I was about the commission of a dreadful crime, and avoided with shuddering anxiety any encounter with my fellow creatures. At one time the moon, which had before been clear, was suddenly overspread by a thick cloud, and I took advantage of the moment of darkness and cast my basket into the sea. I listened to the gurgling sound as it sank, and then sailed away from the spot. The sky became clouded, but the air was pure. Although chilled by the northeast breeze that was then rising, but it refreshed me and filled me with such agreeable sensations that I resolved to prolong my stay on the water, and fixing the rudder in a direct position, stretched myself at the bottom of the boat. Clouds hid the moon, everything was obscure, and I heard only the sound of the boat as its keel cut through the waves. The murmur lured me, and in a short time I slept soundly. I do not know how long I remained in this situation, but when I awoke, I found that the sun had already mounted considerably. The wind was high, and the waves continually threatened the safety of my little skiff. I found that the wind was northeast and must have driven me far from the coast from which I had embarked. I endeavored to change my course, but quickly found that if I again made the attempt, the boat would be instantly filled with water. Thus situated, my only resource was to drive before the wind. I confess that I felt a few sensations of terror. I had no compass with me, and I was so slenderly acquainted with the geography of this part of the world that the sun was of little benefit to me. I might be driven into the wide Atlantic and feel all the tortures of starvation, or be swallowed up in the immeasurable waters that roared and buffeted around me. I had already been out many hours and felt the torment of burning thirst, a prelude to my other sufferings. I looked onto the heavens, which were covered by clouds that flew before the wind, only to be replaced by others. I looked upon the sea. It was to be my grave. Fiend, I exclaimed, your task is already fulfilled. I thought of Elizabeth, of my father, and of Clerval, all left behind, on whom the monster might satisfy his sanguinary and merciless passions. The idea plunged me into a reverie so despairing and frightful that, even now, when this scene is on the point of closing before me forever, I shudder to reflect it. Some hours passed thus, but by degrees, as the sun declined towards the horizon, the wind died away into a gentle breeze, and the sea became free from its breakers. But these gave place to a heavy swell. I felt sick and hardly able to hold the rudder, when suddenly I saw a line of high land towards the south. Almost spent as I was by fatigue and by the dreadful suspense I endured for several hours, this sudden certainty of life rushed like a flood of warm joy to my heart, and tears gushed from my eyes. How mutable are our feelings, and how strange is that clinging love we have of life even in the excess of misery. I constructed another sail with part of my dress and eagerly steered my course towards the land. It had a wild and rocky appearance, but as soon as I approached nearer, I easily perceived the traces of cultivation. I saw vessels near the shore, and found myself suddenly transported back to the neighborhood of civilized man. I carefully traced the windings of the land and hailed the steeple which I, which I at length saw issuing from behind a small promontory. As I was in a state of extreme debility, I resolved to sail directly towards the town, as a place where I could easily procure nourishment. Fortunately, I had money with me. As I turned the promontory, I perceived a small neat town and a good harbor, which I entered. My heart bounded with joy at my unexpected escape. As I was occupied in fixing the boat and arranging the sails, several people crowded towards the spot. They seemed much surprised at my appearance, but instead of offering me any assistance, whispered together with gestures that at any other time might have procured me a slight sensation of alarm. It was, I merely remarked, that they spoke English, and I therefore addressed them in that language. My good friends, said I, will you be so kind as to tell me the name of this town, and inform me where I am? You will know that soon enough, replied a man with a hoarse voice. Maybe you are come to a place that will not prove much to your taste, but you will not be consulted as to your quarters, I promise you. I was exceedingly surprised on receiving so rude an answer from a stranger, and I was disconcerted on perceiving the frowning and angry countenances of his companions. Why do you answer me so roughly? I replied. Surely it is not the custom of Englishmen to receive strangers so inhospitably. I do not know, said the man, what the customs of English may be, but it is the custom of the Irish to hate villains. While this strange dialogue continued, I perceived the crowd rapidly increase. Their faces expressed a mixture of curiosity and anger, which annoyed and, in some degree, alarmed me. I inquired the way to the inn, but no one replied. I then moved forward, and a murmuring sound arose from the crowd, as they followed and surrounded me, when an ill-looking man approached, tapped me on his shoulder, and said, Come, sir, you must follow me to Mr. Kinwood's to give an account of yourself. Who is Mr. Kinwood? Why am I to give an account of myself? Is this not a free country? Aye, sir, free enough for honest folks. Mr. Kinwood is a magistrate, and you are to give an account of the death of a gentleman who was found murdered here last night. This answer startled me, but I presently recovered myself. I was innocent. That could easily be proven. Accordingly, I followed my conductor in silence and led to one of the best houses in the town. I was ready to sink from fatigue and hunger, but being surrounded by a crowd, I thought of politic to arouse all my strength. There was no physical debility that might be constructed into apprehension or conscious guilt. Little did I, little did I then expect the calamity that was in a few moments to overwhelm me, and extinguish in horror and despair all fear and ignominy of death. I must pause here, for it requires all my fortitude to recall the memory of the frightful event which I'm about to relate, in proper detail, to my recollection. End of chapter 20. Excuse me, I have to blow my nose. Excuse me. Alright, 1 second, please. That's better. Sorry, 1 second, I have to reply to a message. 1 second, please. There's too much going on here. Right, sorry about that. It was kind of message. The one they were asking what I was gonna make for dinner tonight. I'm gonna make curry. Yeah, curry sounds good tonight. Right, but that's not for a little bit. Okay. Chapter 21. Shit's about to go down now. Right. I was soon introduced into the presence of the magistrate, an old benevolent man with calm and mild manners. He looked upon me, however, with some degree of severity, and then, turning towards my conductors, he asked who appeared as witness on this occasion. About half a dozen men came forward, and one being selected by the magistrate, he deposed that he had been out fishing that night before with his son and brother-in-law, Daniel and Nugent, when, about 10 o'clock, they observed a strong northerly blast rain, and they accordingly put in for port. It was a very dark night, as the moon had not yet risen. They did not land at the harbor, but, as they had been accustomed, at a creek about 2 miles below. He walked on first, carrying a part of the fishing tackle, and his companion followed him at some distance. As he was proceeding along the sands, he struck his foot against something and fell his length at the ground. His companions came up to assist him, and by the light of their lantern, they found he had fallen on the body of a man who was, to all appearance, dead. The first supposition was that it was that of a corpse of some person who had drowned or was thrown on the shore by the waves, but on examination, they found that the clothes were not wet, and even the body was not then cold. They instantly carried it to the cottage of an old woman near the spot, and endeavored, but in vain, to restore it to life. It appeared to be a handsome young man, about 25 years of age. He had apparently been strangled, for there was no sign of violence except for the black mark of fingers on his neck. The first part of this disposition did not in the least interest me, but when the marks of the fingers were mentioned, I remembered the murder of my brother, and felt myself extremely agitated. My limbs trembled, and a mist came over my eyes, which obliged me to lean on my chair for support. The magistrate observed me, and with a keen eye, and of course drew an unfavorable augury from my manner. The son confirmed his father's account, but when Daniel Nugent was called, he swore positively that just before the fall of his companion, he saw a boat, with a single man in it, at a short distance from the shore, and as far as he could judge by the light of the few stars, it was the same boat in which I had just landed. A woman deposed that she lived near the beach and was standing at the door of her cottage, waiting for the return of the fishermen about an hour before she heard the discovery of the body, when she saw a boat with only one man in it push off from that part of the shore where the corpse was afterward found. Another woman confirmed the account of the fishermen having brought the body into her house. It was not cold, as they put it into a bed and rubbed it, and Daniel went to town for an apothecary, but life was quite gone. Several other men were examined concerning my landing, and they agreed that, with the strong north wind that had arisen during the night, it was very probable that I had been about for many hours and had been obliged to return nearly to the same spot from which I departed. Besides, they observed that it appeared that I had brought the body from another place, and it was likely I did not appear to know the shore. I might have put into the harbor ignorant of the distance of the town, or from the place I had deposited the corpse. Mr. Kerwin, on hearing this evidence, desired that I should be taken into the room where the body lay for interment, that I might be observed of what effect the sight of it would produce upon me. This idea was probably suggested by the extreme agitation I had exhibited when the mode of murder had been described. I was accordingly conducted by the magistrate and several other persons to the inn. I cannot help being struck by the strange coincidences that had taken place during this eventful night, but knowing that I had been conversing with several persons in the island, I had inhabited about the time that the body had been found. I was perfectly tranquil as to the consequence of the affair. I entered the room where the corpse lay and was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensation on beholding it? I feel yet part with horror, nor can I reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering in agony. The examination, the presence of the magistrate and witnesses, passing like a dream from my memory, when I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me. I gasped for breath, and, throwing myself on the body, I exclaimed, "Have my murderous machinations depraved you also, my dearest Henry, of life? Two I have already destroyed. Other victims await their destiny, but you, Clerval, my friend, my benefactor." The human frame could no longer support the agonies that I endured, and I was carried out of the room with strong convulsions. A fever succeeded to this. I lay for 2 months on the point of death. My ravings, as I afterwards heard were frightful. I called myself the murderer of William, of Justine, and of Clerval. Sometimes I entreated my attendants to assist me in the destruction of the fiend by whom I was tormented, and at others I felt the fingers of the monster already grasping at my neck. I screamed aloud with agony and terror. Fortunately, as I spoke my native language, Mr. Kerwin alone understood me, but my gestures and bitter cries were sufficient to affright the other witnesses. Why did I not die? More miserable than any man who ever was before, why did I not sink into a forgetfulness and rest? Death snatches away many blooming children, the only hopes of their doting parents. How many brides and youthful lovers have been one day in bloom of health and hope, and the next prey for worms and the decay of the tones? Of what materials was I made that I could thus resist so many shocks, which, like churning of the wheels, continually renewed the torture? But I was doomed to live, and in 2 months found myself as awakened from the dream, in a prison, stretched on a warped bed, surrounded by jailers, turnkeys, bolts, and all the miserable apparatuses of a dungeon. It was morning. I remember when I thus awoke to understand. I had forgotten the particulars of what had happened, and only felt as if some great misfortune had suddenly overwhelmed me. But when I looked around and saw the saw the bared windows and the squalidness of the room which I was in, all flashed across my memory, and I groaned bitterly. This sound disturbed an old woman who was sleeping in a chair beside me. She was a hired nurse, the wife of one of the turnkeys, and her countenance expressed all those bad qualities which often characterized that class. The lines of her face were hard and rude, like that of persons accustomed to seeing without sympathizing in sights of misery. Her tone expressed her entire indifference. She addressed me in English, and the voice struck me as one I had heard during my suffering. "Are you better now, sir?" said she. I replied in the same language, with a feeble voice, "I believe I am, but if it be true, all true, if indeed I did not dream, I am sorry that I am still alive to feel this misery and horror." "For that matter," replied the old woman, "if you mean about the gentleman you murdered, I believe it were better for you if you were dead, for I fancy it will go hard with you. However, that's none of my business. I am sent to nurse you and get you well. I will do my duty with a safe conscience. It were well if everyone did the same." I turned with loathing from the woman, who could utter so unfeeling a speech to a person just saved, on the very edge of death, but I feel languid and unable to reflect on all that had passed. A whole series of my life appeared to me as a dream. I sometimes doubted if indeed it were all true, for it never presented itself to my mind with the force of reality. As the images that floated before me became more distinct, I grew feverish. A darkness pressed about me. No one was near me who soothed me with his gentle voice of love. No dear hand supported me. The physician came and prescribed medicines, and the old woman prepared them for me. But utter carelessness was visible in the first, and the expression of brutality was so strongly marked in the visage of the second. Who could be interested in the fate of a murderer but the hangman, who would gain his fee? These were my first reflections, but I soon learned that Mr. Kerwin had shown me extreme kindness. He had caused the best room in the prison to be prepared for me. Wretched indeed was the best, and it was he who had provided a physician and a nurse. It is true, he seldom came to see me, for although he ardently desired to relieve the sufferings of every human creature, he did not wish to be present at the agonies and miserable ravings of a murderer. He came, therefore, sometimes to see that I was not neglected, but his visits were short, and with long intervals. One day, while I was gradually recovering, I was seated in a chair, my eyes half open and my cheeks livid like those in death. I was overcome by gloom and misery, and often reflected I had better seek death than desire to remain in a world which to me was replete with wretchedness. At one time I considered whether I should not declare myself guilty and suffer the penalty of the law. less innocent than poor Justine had been. Such were my thoughts when the door of my apartment was opened and Mr. Kerwin entered. His countenance expressed sympathy and compassion. He drew a chair close to mine and addressed me in French. I fear that this place is very shocking to you. Can I do anything to make you more comfortable? I thank you. Sorry. I thank you, but all that you mention is nothing to me. On the whole earth, there is no comfort which I am capable of receiving. I know that the stranger can be but that of little relief to one borne down as you are by a strange misfortune, but you will, I hope, soon quit this melancholy abode, for doubtless evidence can easily be brought you free from the criminal charge. That is my least concern. I am, by a course of strange events, become the most miserable of mortals. Persecuted and tortured as I am, and have been, can death be any evil to me? Nothing indeed could be more unfortunate and agonizing than the strange chance that have lately occurred. You were thrown, by some surprising accident, on this shore, renowned for its hospitality, seized immediately, and charged with murder. The first sight that was presented to your eyes was the body of your friend, murdered in a so unaccountable a manner, and placed, as it were, by some fiend across your path. As Mr. Kerwin said this, notwithstanding the agitation I endured, on this retrospect of my sufferings, I also felt considerable surprise at this knowledge he seemed possessed concerning me. I suppose some astonishment was exhibited in my countenance, for Mr. Kerwin hastened to say, immediately upon your being taken ill, all the papers that were on your person were brought to me. I examined them that I might discover by some trace by which I could send your relations an account of your misfortune and illness. I found several letters, and, among others, one which I discovered from its commencement to be from your father. I instantly wrote to Geneva. Nearly 2 months have elapsed since the departure of my letter, but you are ill. Even now you tremble. You are unfit for agitation of any kind. This suspense is 1,000 times worse than the most horrible event. Tell me, what new scene of death has been acted, and whose murder am I now to lament? Your family is perfectly well, said Mr. Kerwin with gentleness, and someone, a friend, is come to visit you. I know not by what chain of thought the idea presented itself, but it instantly darted into my mind that the murderer had come to mock at my misery, and taunt me with the den of Clerval, as a new incitement for me to comply with his hellish desires, to put my hands before my eyes, and cried out in agony, "Oh, take him away! I cannot see him! For God's sakes, do not let him enter!" Mr. Kerwin regarded me with a troubled countenance. He could not help in regarding my exclamation as a presumption of my guilt, said in his rather severe tone, "I should have thought, young man, that the presence of your father would have been welcome instead of inspiring such a violent repugnance." "My father?" cried I, while every feature and every muscle was relaxed from anguish to pleasure. "Is my father indeed come? How kind! How very kind! But where is he? Why does he not hasten to me?" My change of manner surprised and pleased the magistrate. Perhaps he thought my former exclamation was a momentary return of delirium, and now he has resumed his former benevolence. He rose and quitted the room with my nurse, and, in a moment, my father entered it. Nothing, at that moment, could have given me greater pleasure than the arrival of my father. I stretched out my hand to him, and cried, "Are you, then, safe, and Elizabeth, and Ernest?" My father calmed me with assurance of their welfare, and endeavored, by dwelling on these subjects so interesting to my heart, to raise my desponding spirits, but he soon felt that a prison cannot be the abode of cheerfulness. "What a place is this that you inhabit, my son?" said he, looking mournfully at the barred windows and wretched appearance of the room. "You travel to seek happiness, but a fatality seems to pursue you, and poor Clerval." The name of my unfortunate and murdered friend was an agitation too great to be endured by my weak state, and I shed tears. "Alas! Yes, my father," replied I. "Some destiny of the most horrible kind hangs over me, and I must live to fulfill it, or early I should have died on the coffee of Henry." We were not allowed to converse for any length of time, for the precarious state of my health rendered every precaution necessary that could ensure tranquillity. Mr. Kerwin came in and insisted that my strength should not be exhausted by too much exertion, but the appearance of my father was like to me that of a good angel, and I gradually recovered my health. As my sickness quitted me, I was absorbed by a gloomy and black melancholy that nothing could dissipate. The image of Clerval was forever before me, ghastly and murdered. More than once the agitation into which of these reflections threw me made my friends dread of dangerous relapse. Alas, why do they preserve so miserable and detested a life? I was surely that I might fulfill my destiny, which is now drawing to a close. Soon, oh, very soon, will death extinguish these throbbings and relieve me from the mighty weight of anguish that bears me to the dust, and in executing the award of justice, I shall also sink to rest. That the appearance of death was distant, although the wish was ever present to my thoughts, I often sat for hours, motionless and speechless, wishing for some mighty revolution that might bury me and destroy it in its ruins. The season of the assizes approached. I had already been there 3 months in prison, and though I was still weak and in continual danger of a relapse, I was obliged to travel nearly 100 miles to the country town where the court was held. Mr. Kerwin charged himself with every care of collecting witnesses and arranging my defense. I was spared the disgrace of appearing publicly as a criminal, as the case was not brought before the court that decides on life and death. The grand jury rejected the bill on its being proved that I was on the Orkney Isles at the hour of the body of my friend was found, and at the fortnight after my removal, I was liberated from my prison. My father was enraptured on finding me freed from the vexations of a criminal charge, that I was again allowed to breathe a fresh atmosphere and permitted to return to my native country. I did not participate in these feelings, for me the walls of the dungeon or the palace were alike hateful. The cup of life was poisoned forever, and although the sun shone upon me, and upon the happy and gay of heart, I saw around me nothing but a dense and frightful darkness, penetrated by no light but the glimmer of 2 eyes that glared upon me. Sometimes they were expressive eyes of Henry, languishing in death. The dark orbs nearly covered the lids and the long black lashes that fringed them. Sometimes it was the watery and clouded eyes of the monster, as I first saw them in my chamber in Ingolstadt. My father tried to awaken in me the feelings of affection. He talked of Geneva, which I should soon visit, of Elizabeth in earnest, but these words only drew deep groans from me. Sometimes, indeed, I felt a wish for happiness, and thought with melancholy delight of my beloved cousin, or, longer, of the devouring Malais des Bois, and see once more the blue lake of rapid of Rhone that had been so dear to me in early childhood. But my general state of feeling was a torpor in which a prison was welcome as a residence in the divine scene of nature, and these fits were seldom interrupted by the paroxysms of anguish and despair. At these moments, I often endeavored to put an end to an existence I loathed, and it required unceasing attendance and vigilance to restrain me from committing some dreadful acts of violence. Yet, one duty remained to me, the recollection of which finally triumphed over my selfish despair. It was necessary that I should return without delay to Geneva, there to watch over the lives and of those I so fondly loved, and to lie in wait for the murderer, that if any chance led me to the place of concealment, or if he dared again to blast me with his presence, I might, with unfailing aim, put an end to the existence of the monstrous image which I had endured with mockery of a soul still more monstrous. My father still desired to delay our departure, fearful that I could not sustain the fatigues of a journey, for I was a shattered wreck, the shadow of a human being. My strength was gone. I was a mere skeleton, and a fever night and day preyed upon my wasted frame. Still, as I urged our leaving Ireland with such inquietude and impatience, my father thought it best to yield. We took our passage on board a vessel bound for Havre de Grace, and sailed with a fair wind from the Irish shores. It was midnight, and I lay on the deck looking at the stars, listening to the dashings of waves. I hailed the darkness that shut Ireland from my sight, and my pulse beat with feverish joy when I reflected I should soon see Geneva. The past appeared to me in the light of a fearful dream. Yet, as the vessel in which I was, the wind that blew me from the detested shore of Ireland, and the sea that surrounded me, pulled too forcibly, that I was deceived by no vision, and that Clerval, my friend and dearest companion, had fallen victim to me and the monster of my creation. I repassed, in my memory, my whole life, my quiet happiness while residing with my family in Geneva. The death of my mother and my departure for Ingolstadt, I remembered, shuddering, the mad enthusiasm that hurried on to me, the creation of my hideous enemy, and I called to mind the night in which he first lived. I was unable to pursue the train of thought. 1,000 feelings pressed upon me, and I wept bitterly. Ever since my recovery from the fever, I had been in custom of taking every night a small quantity of laudanum, for it was by means of this drug only that I was then able to gain the rest necessary for the preservation of life. Pressed by the recollection of my various misfortunes, I now swallowed double my usual quantity, and soon slept profoundly. But sleep did not afford me respite from thought and misery. My dream presented 1,000 objects that scared me. Towards morning I was possessed by a kind of nightmare. I felt the fiend's grasp in my neck and could not free myself from it. Groans and cries rang in my ears. My father, who was watching over me, perceived my restlessness, awoke me. The dashing waves were around, the cloud sky above, and the fiend was not here. A sense of security, a feeling that a truce was established between the present hour and the irresistible, disastrous future, imparted to me a kind of calm forgetfulness, of which the human mind is, by its structure, particularly susceptible. End of chapter 21. Right. I'm going to be right back. I need to go get some water. I will be right back. One moment, please. There we go. Sorry about that. You've returned. Right. You know, it's already been an hour, and we're only 2 chapters in, and the last chapter is pretty long, just from checking, so I might be here a bit. Well, I'm determined to finish this. I said I would finish it, so I'm gonna finish it. Okay, we're good. We're good. 1 second, please. I gotta go to the store and get a couple of things. One thing I keep forgetting to buy is gum. I gotta buy more gum because I don't know if you know, I actually have like oral fixation needs, so gum is really good for me. It helps distract me and make sure I don't eat shit I shouldn't be eating. Oh well, no worries. Right. Chapter 22. The voyage came to an end. We landed and proceeded to Paris. I soon found that I had overtaxed my strength and I must recover before I could continue my journey. My father's care and attentions were indef- for fuck's sake, indefatigable. Indefatigable. That's a word? Indefatigable? Yeah, whatever. But he did not know the origins of my sufferings and sought erroneous methods to remedy the incurable ill. He wished me to seek amusement in society. I abhorred the face of man. Oh, not abhorred. They are my brethren, my fellow beings, and I felt attracted even to the most repulsive of them. As to the creatures of angelic nature and celestial mechanism, but I felt that I had no right to share their intercourse. I had chained an enemy among them whose joy it was to shed their blood and to revel in their groans. How would they, how they would, each and all, abhor me and hunt me from the world if they did know my intolerant acts and the crimes which had been source in me. My father yielded at length to my desire to avoid society and strove by various arguments to banish my despair. Sometimes he thought I felt deeply the degradation of being obliged to answer a charge of murder, and he endeavored to prove to me the futility of pride. Alas, my father, said I, how little do you know of me? Human beings with their feelings and passions would indeed be degraded if such wretch as I felt pride. Justine, poor, unhappy Justine, was as innocent as I, and she suffered the same charge. She died for it, and I am the cause of this. I murdered her. William, Justine, and Henry. They are all died by my hands. My father had often, during my imprisonment, heard me make the same assertion. When I thus accused myself, he sometimes seemed to desire an explanation, and at others he appeared to consider it as the offspring of delirium, and that during my illness some idea of this kind had presented itself to my imagination, the remembrance of which I preserved in my convalescence. I avoided the explanation and maintained a continual silence concerning the wretch I had created. I had persuasion that I should suppose be mad, and this is in itself would forever have changed my tongue. But besides, I cannot bring myself to disclose a secret which would fill my hair with consternation and make fear and unnatural horror the inmates of his breast. I checked, therefore, my impatient thirst for sympathy was silent when I would have given the world to have confided the fatal secret. Yet still, words like those I have recorded would burst uncontrollably from me. I could offer no explanation in them, but their truth in part relieved the burden of my mysterious woe. Upon this occasion, my father said, with an expression of unbound wonder, "My dearest Victor, what infatuation is this? My dear son, I entreat you never to make such an assertion again." "I am not mad," I cried energetically. "The sun and the heavens, who have viewed my operations, can bear witness to the truth. I am the assassin of those most innocent victims. They died by my machinations. 1,000 times would I have shed my own blood, drop by drop, to have saved their lives. But I could not. My father, indeed, I could not sacrifice the whole human race. The conclusion of this speech convinced my father that my ideas were deranged, and he instantly changed the subject of our conversation and endeavored to alter the course of my thoughts. He wished as much as possible to obliterate the memory of the scenes that had taken place in Ireland, and never allude to them, or speak to me as such of my misfortunes. As time passed away, I became more calm. Misery had her dwelling in my heart, and I no longer talked in the same incoherent manner of my own crimes. Sufficient for me was the consciousness of them, but, by the utmost self-violence, I curbed the imperious voice of wretchedness, which sometimes desired to declare itself to the whole world, and my manners were calmer and more composed than they had been since my journey to the Sea of Ice. A few days before we left Paris on our way to Switzerland, I received the following letter from Elizabeth. I'm sorry, I just have to stretch slightly. There we go. My dear friend, it gave me the greatest pleasure to receive a letter from my uncle dated at Paris. You are no longer at a formidable distance, and I may hope to see you less than a fortnight. My poor cousin, how much you have suffered. I expect to see you looking even more ill than when you quitted Geneva. This winter has passed most miserably, tortured as I have been by anxious suspense, yet I hope to see peace in your countenance and find that in your heart it is not totally void of comfort and tranquillity. Yet I fear that the same feelings now exist that made you so miserable a year ago, even perhaps augmented by time. I would not disturb you at this period, when so many misfortunes weigh upon you, but a conversation that I had with my uncle previous to his departure renders some explanation necessary before we meet. Explanation, you may possibly say. What can Elizabeth have to explain? If you really say this, my questions are answered and all my doubts are satisfied. But you are distant from me, and it's possible that you may dread and yet be pleased with this explanation. And in the probability of this being the case, I dare no longer any postpone writing what, during your absence, I have often wished to express to you, but have never had the courage to begin. You will know, Victor, that our union has been the favorite plan of your parents ever since our infancy. When we were told this when young, and ought to look forward to it as an event that would certainly take place. We were affectionate playfellows during childhood, and, I believe, dear and valued friends to one another as we grew older. But as brother and sister, often entertain a lively affection towards each other without desiring a more intimate union. May not such also be your case? Tell me, dearest Victor, answer me. I conjure you by our mutual happiness, with simple truth. Do you not love another? You have traveled, you have spent several years of your life at Ingolstadt, and I confess to you, my friend, that when I saw you last autumn, so unhappy, flying to solitude from society from every creature, I cannot hope suppose that you might regret our connection, and believe yourself bound in honor to fulfill the wishes of your parents, although they oppose themselves with your inclinations. But this is a false reasoning. I confess to you, my friend, that I love you, and that in my airy dreams of futurity, you have been my constant friend and companion. But it is your happiness I desire as well as my own, when I declare to you that our marriage would render me eternally miserable, unless it were to dictate you of your free choice. Even now, I weep to think that borne down as you are by the cruelest misfortune, you may stifle by the word honor all hope of that love and happiness which would alone restore you to yourself. I, who have so disinterested as affection for you, may increase your miseries tenfold by being an obstacle to your wishes. Ah, Victor, be assured that your cousin and playmate has too sincere a love for you to not be made miserable by this supposition. Be happy, my friend, and if you obey me in this one request, remain satisfied that nothing on earth will have the power to interrupt my tranquillity. Excuse me. Do not let this letter disturb you. Do not answer tomorrow, or the next day, or even until you come, if it will give you pain. My uncle will send me news of your health, and if I see but one smile on your lips when we meet, occasioned by this or any other exertion of mine, I shall need no other happiness. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, May 18th, 17 something. This letter revived in my memory what I had before forgotten, the threat of the fiend. I will be with you on your wedding night. Such was my sentence, and on that night would the demon employ every art to destroy me, and tear from me the glimpse of happiness which promised partly to console my sufferings. On that night he had determined to consummate his crimes by my death. Well, be it so. A deadly struggle would then assuredly take place, in which, if he were victorious, I should be at peace, and his power over me will be at an end. If he were vanquished, I should be a free man. Alas, what is freedom? Such as a peasant enjoys when his family has been massacred before his eyes, his cottage burnt, his lands lay waste, and he is turned adrift, homeless, penniless, and alone, but free. Such would be my liberty, except then my Elizabeth. I possess a treasure, alas, balanced by those horrors of remorse and guilt which would pursue me until death. Sweet and beloved Elizabeth, I read and reread her letter, and some softened feeling stole in my heart and dared to whisper paradisiacal dreams of love and joy. But the apple was already eaten, and the angel's arm bare to drive me from all hope. Yet I would die to make her happy. If the monster executed his threat, death was inevitable. Yet, again, I considered whether my marriage would hasten my fate. My destruction might indeed arrive a few months sooner. But if my torturer should suspect that I had postponed it, influenced by his menaces, he would surely find other and perhaps more dreadful means of my revenge. He had vowed to be with me on my wedding night. Yet, he did not consider that threat as binding him to peace in the meantime, for as if to show me that he had not yet satiated with blood, he had murdered Clerval immediately after the enunciation of his threats. I resolved, therefore, that if my immediate union with my cousin would conduce either to hers or my father's happiness, my adversary's designs against my life should not retard it a single hour. In this state of mind, I wrote to Elizabeth. My letter was calm and affectionate. I fear, my beloved girl, I said, little happiness remains for us on earth. Yet, all that I may one day enjoy is centered in you. Chase away your idle fears. To you alone do I consecrate my life and my endeavors for contentment. I have one secret, Elizabeth, a dreadful one. When revealed to you, it will chill your frame with horror, and then, far from being surprised at my misery, you will only wonder that I survived what I have endured. I will confide this tale of misery and terror to you on the day after our marriage shall take place. For, my sweet cousin, there must be a perfect confidence between us. But until then, I conjure you, do not mention or allude it. This is the most earnestly entreat. I know you will comply. In about a week after the arrival of Elizabeth's letter, we returned to Geneva. The sweet girl welcomed me with warm affection, yet tears were in her eyes as she beheld my emaciated frame and feverish cheeks. I saw a change in her also. She was thinner, and had lost much of that heavenly vivacity that had before charmed me. But her gentleness and soft looks of compassion made her more fit companion for one blasted and miserable as I was. The tranquillity which I now enjoyed did not endure. Memory brought madness with it, and when I thought of what now passed, a real insanity possessed me. Sometimes I was furious and burnt with rage, sometimes low and despondent. I neither spoke nor looked at anyone, but sat motionless, bewildered by the multitude of miseries that overcame me. Elizabeth alone had the power to draw me from these fists. Her gentle voice would soothe me when transported by passion and inspire me with human feelings when sunk in torpor. She wept with me and for me. When reason returned, she would remonstrate and endeavor to inspire me with resignation. Ah, it is well for the unfortunate to be resigned, but for the guilty there is no peace. The agonies of remorse poison the luxury there is otherwise sometimes found in indulging the excess of grief. Soon after my arrival, my father spoke of immediate marriage with Elizabeth, and I remained silent. Have you, then, some other attachment? None on earth. I love Elizabeth, and look forward to our union with delight. Let the day therefore be fixed, and on it I was to consecrate myself, in life or death, to the happiness of my cousin. My dear Victor, do not speak thus. Heavy misfortunes have befallen us, but let us only cling closer to what remains, and transfer our love for those who we have lost to those who yet live. Our circle will be small, but bound close by the ties of affection and mutual misfortune. And when time shall have softened your despair, new and dear objects of care will be born to replace those who have been so cruelly deprived. Such were the lessons of my father, but to me the remembrance of the threat returned. Nor can you wonder that, omnipotent as the fiend had yet been in his deeds of blood, I should almost regard him as invincible. And then when he pronounced the words, "I shall be with you on your wedding night," I should regard the threatened fate as unavoidable. But death was no evil to me, if the loss of Elizabeth was balanced with it. I therefore, with contented and even cheerful countenance, agreed with father that, if my cousin would consent, the ceremony should take place in 10 days, and thus put, as I imagined, the seal to my fate. Great God! If for one instant I had thought that what might be the hellish intention of my fiendish adversary, I would rather have banished myself forever from my native country, and wandered a friendless outcast over the earth, and have consented to this miserable marriage. But, as if possessed of magical powers, the monster had blinded me to his real intentions, and when I thought that I had prepared only my own death, I hastened that of a far dearer victim. As the period fixed for our marriage drew near, whether from cowardice or a prophetic feeling, I felt my heart sink within me. But I concealed my feelings by an appearance of hilarity that brought smiles and joy to the countenance of my father, but hardly deceived the ever watchful and nicer eye of Elizabeth. She looked forward to our union with placid contentment, not unmingled with little fear, which past misfortune had impressed, and what now appeared certain and tangible happiness might soon dissipate into an airy dream and leave no trace but deep and everlasting regret. Preparations were made for the event, congratulatory visits were received, and all wore with a smiling appearance. I shut up, as well as I could, in my own heart the anxiety that preyed there, and entered with seemingly earnestness into the plans of my father, although they might only serve as decorations to my tragedy. Though my father's exertions were a part of the inheritance of Elizabeth, had been restored to her by the Austrian government. A small port possession of the shores of Como belonged to her. It was agreed that, immediately after our union, we should proceed to Villa Lavenza, and spend our first days of happiness beside the beautiful lake near which it stood. In the meantime, I took every precaution to defend my person in case the fiend should openly attack me. I carried pistols and a dagger constantly about me, and was ever on the watch to prevent artifice, and by these means gained a greater degree of tranquillity. Indeed, as the period approached, the threat appeared more of delusion, not to be regarded as worthy to disturb my peace, while the happiness I hoped for in my marriage wore a greater appearance of certainty as the day fixed of its solemnization drew nearer, and I heard it continually spoken as of occurrence with no accident could possibly prevent. Elizabeth seemed happy, and my tranquil demeanor contributed greatly to the calm of her mind. But on the day that was to fulfill my wishes and my destiny, she was melancholy. As a presentiment of evil pervaded her, and perhaps also she thought of the dreadful secret which I had promised to reveal to her the following day. My father was in the meantime overjoyed, and in the bustle of preparation of only recognizing the melancholy of his niece and diffidence of the bride. After the ceremony was performed, a large party assembled at my father's, but it was agreed that Elizabeth and I should commence our journey by water. Sleeping that night at Evian and seeing our voyage on the following day. The day was fair, the wind favorable. All smiled on our nuptial embarkation. Embarkation? Fucking hell. Old English, man. These were the last moments of my life during which I enjoyed the feelings of happiness. We passed rapidly along. The sun was hot, but we were sheltered from its rays by a kind of canopy, while we enjoyed the beauty of the sea. Sometimes on one side of the lake, where we saw Mount Saleve, the pleasant banks of Montegre, and at a distance, surmounting all, the beautiful Mont Blanc. As the ensemble of snowy mountains found in vain endeavored to emulate her, sometimes coasting in opposite banks, we saw the mighty Jura opposing its dark side to the ambition that would quit its native country, and an almost insurmountable barrier to the invader who should wish to enslave it. I took the hand of Elizabeth. You are sorrowful, my love. Ah, if you knew what I have suffered and what I may yet endure, you would endeavor to let me taste the quiet and freedom from despair that this one day at least permits me to enjoy. Be happy, my dear Victor, replied Elizabeth. There is, I hope, nothing to distress you, and be assured that if a lively joy is not painted in my face, my heart is contented. Something whispers to me not to depend too much on the prospect that is open before us, but I will not listen to such a sinister voice. Observe how fast we move along and how the clouds, sometimes which obscure and sometimes rise above the dome of Mont Blanc, render the scene of beauty still more interesting. Look also at the innumerable fish that are swimming in the clear waters, where we can distinguish every pebble that lies at the bottom. What a divine day! How happy and serene how happy and serene our own nature appears. Thus Elizabeth endeavored to divert her thoughts and mind from all reflection upon melancholy subjects. But her temper was fluctuating. Joy for a few instants shone in her eye, but it continually gave place to distraction and reverie. The sun sank lower in the heavens. We passed the river Drance and observed it pass through the chasms of the higher and the glens of the lower hills. The Alps here come closer to the lake, and we approached the aperture of the mountains which formed its eastern boundary. The spire of Avian shore shone under the woods that surrounded it and the range of the mountain. And the range of mountain above mountain which was overhung. The wind which had hitherto carried us along with amazing rapidity, sank at sunset to a light breeze. The soft air was just ruffled the water and caused a pleasant motion among the trees as we approached the shore, from which it wafted the most delightful scent of flowers and hay. The sun sank beneath the horizon as we landed, and I touched the shore. I felt those cares and fears revive, which soon were to clasp me and cling to me forever. End of chapter 22. Right, 2 more chapters left. Right then. Okay. Sorry, I gotta blow my nose again. Okay. Chapter 23. It was 8 o'clock when we landed. We walked for a short time on the shore, enjoying the transitory light, and then retired to the inn and contemplated the lovely scene of waters, woods, and mountains, obscure in darkness, yet displaying their black outlines. The wind which had fallen in the south now rose with great violence in the west. The moon had reached her summit, and in the heavens, and was beginning to descend. The clouds swept across it swifter than the flight of the vulture, and dimmed her rays, and while the lake reflected the scene of the busy heavens, rendered still busier by the restless waves that were beginning to rise, suddenly a heavy storm rain descended. I had been calmer during the day, but so soon as night obscured the shapes of objects, 1,000 fears arose in my mind. I was anxious and watchful, while my right hand grasped a pistol which was hidden in my bosom. Every sound terrified me, but I resolved that I would sell my life dearly, and not shrink from the conflict until my own life, and that of my adversary was extinguished. Elizabeth observed my agitation for some time in timid and fearful silence, but there was something in my glance which communicated terror to her, and trembling, she asked, "What is it that agitates you, my dear Victor? What is it you fear?" "Oh, peace, peace, my love," replied I. "This night and all will be safe, but this night is dreadful, very dreadful." I passed an hour in this state of mind, when suddenly I reflected how fearful the combat which I momentarily expected would be to my wife, and I earnestly entreated her to retire, resolving not to join her until I had obtained some knowledge as to the situation of my enemy. She left me, and I continued some time walking up and down the passages of the house and inspecting every corner that might afford a retreat to my adversary. But I discovered no trace of him, and was beginning to conjecture that some fortunate chance had intervened to prevent the execution of his menaces, when suddenly I heard a shrill and dreadful scream. It came from the room in which Elizabeth had retired. Oh, 1 second. I, as I heard it, the whole truth rushed into my mind. My arms dropped. The motion of every muscle and fiber was suspended. I could feel the blood trickling in my veins and tingling in the extremities of my limbs. This state lasted but for an instant. The scream repeated. I rushed into the room. Great God! Why did I not then expire? Why am I here to relate the destruction of the best hope and the purest creature of earth? She was there, lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her head hanging down, her pale and distorted feature half covered by her hair. Everywhere I turned I see the same figure, her bloodless arms and relaxed form flung by the murderer on the bridal bier. If I behold this and live, life is obstinate and clings close where it is most hated. For only a moment did I lose recollection. I fell senseless on the ground. When I recovered, I found myself surrounded by the people of the inn. Their countenance expressed a breathless terror, but the horrors of others appeared only as a mockery, a shadow of the feelings that oppressed me. I escaped from them to the room where lay the body of Elizabeth, my love, my wife, so lately living, so dear, so worthy. She had been moved from the posture in which I first beheld her, and now, as she lay, her head upon her arm, and a handkerchief thrown across her face and neck, I might have supposed her asleep. I rushed towards her and embraced her with a door, but the deadly languor and coldness of her limbs told me that what I now held in my arms ceased to be Elizabeth, whom I had loved and cherished. The murderous mark of the fiend's grasp was on her neck, and the breath had ceased to issue from her lips. While I still hung over her in the agony of despair, I happened to look up. The windows of the room had been darkened. I felt a kind of panic on seeing the pale yellow light of the moon illuminate the chamber. The shutters had been thrown back, when with a sensation of horror not to be described, I saw at the open window a figure most hideous and abhorred. A grin was on the face of the monster. He seemed to jeer, as with his fiendish finger he pointed towards the corpse of my wife. I rushed towards the window, and drawing a pistol from my bosom, fired, but he eluded me, leaped from his station, and running with the swiftness of lightning, plunged into the lake. The report of the pistol brought the crowd into the room. I pointed to the spot where he disappeared, and we followed the track with boats. Nets were cast, but in vain. After passing several hours, we returned hopeless. Most of my kin believe it to have been a form of conjured in my fancy. After having landed, they proceeded to search the country, parties going in different directions among the woods and vines. I intended to accompany them. I proceeded a short distance from the house, but my head whirled around. My steps were like that of those of a drunken man. I fell at last in a state of utter exhaustion. A film covered my eyes, my skin was parched and my head with fever. In this state, I was carried back and placed on a bed, hardly conscious what had happened. My eyes wandered round the room. as if to seek something that I had lost. After an interval, I arose, and, if by an instinct, crawled into the room where the corpse of my beloved lay. There were women weeping around. I hung over it, and joined my sad tears to theirs. All this time, no distinct idea presented itself to my mind, but my thoughts rambled to various subjects, reflecting pleasantly on my misfortunes and their cause. I was bewildered. In a cloud of wonder and horror, the death of William, the execution of Justine, the murder of Clerval, and lastly, of my wife. Even at that moment, I knew not that my remaining friends were. I knew that my only remaining friends were safe from the malignity of the fiend. My father, even now, might be writhing under his grasp, and Ernest might be dead at his feet. This idea made me shiver, and recalled me to action. I started up, and resolved to return to Geneva with all possible speed. There were no horses to be procured, and I must return by the lake, but the wind was unfavorable, and the rain fell in torrents. However, it was hardly morning, and I might reasonably hope to arrive by night. I hired men to row and took an oar myself, for I had always experienced relief from mental torment and bodily exercise. But the overflowing misery I now felt, and the excessive agitation that I endured, rendered me incapable of any exertion. I threw down my oar, and leaning my head in my hands, gave way to every gloomy idea that arose. If I looked up, I saw scenes which were familiar to me in my happier time, in which I contemplated but the day before in the company of her who was now but a shadow and a recollection. Tears streamed from my eyes. The rain had ceased for a moment, but I saw a fish play in the waters, as they had done a few hours before. They had been observed by Elizabeth. Nothing is so painful to the human mind as a great and sudden change. The sun might shine, or the clouds might get lower, but nothing could appear to me as they had done that day before. A fiend had snatched from me every hope of future happiness. No creature had ever been so miserable as I was, so frightful an event and is single in the history of man. But why should I dwell upon the incidents that I follow on this last overwhelming event? Mine had been the tale of horrors, and I reached their acme, and what I must now relate can be but tedious to you. Know that, one by one, my friends were snatched away. I was left desolate. My own strength is exhausted. I must tell, in a few words, the remains of my hideous narration. I arrived at Geneva. My father and Ernest yet lived, but the former sunk under the tidings that I bore. I see him now. Excellent and venerable old man. His eyes wandered in vacancy, for they had lost their charm and their delight. His Elizabeth, his more than daughter, whom he doted on with all the affection that a man feels, whom, in the decline of life, having few affections, clings more earnestly to those that remain. Cursed be the fiend that brought misery on his grey hairs, and doomed him to waste and wretchedness. He could not live under the horrors that were accumulated around him. The springs of existence suddenly gave way. He was unable to rise from his bed, and in a few days, he died in my arms. What then became of me? I know not. I lost sensation, and chains and darkness were the only objects that pressed upon me. Sometimes, indeed, I dreamt that I wandered in flowery meadows and pleasant vales with friends from my youth, but I awoke and found myself in a dungeon. Melancholy followed, but by degrees I gained a clear conception of my miseries, and the situation was then released from my prison, for they had called me mad, and during many months, as I understood, the solitary cell had been my habitation. Liberty, however, had been a useful gift to me. Had I not, as I awoken to reason, at the same time awakened to revenge? As the memory of the past misfortune pressed upon me, I began to reflect on their cause, and the monster whom I created, the miserable demon who I had sent abroad into the world for my destruction. I was possessed by a maddening rage when I thought of him, and desired, and ardently prayed, that I might have him within my grasp, to wreak a great and signal revenge on his cursed head. Nor did I hate my nor did my hate long confine itself to its useless wishes. I began to reflect on the best means of securing him, and for this purpose, about a month after my release, I repaired to a criminal judge of the town and told him that I had an acquisition to make, that I knew the destroyer of my family, and that I required him to exert the most authority for the apprehension of the murderer. The magistrate listened to me with attention and kindness. "Be assured, sir," said he, "no pains or exertions on my part shall be spared to discover the villain." "I thank you," replied I. "Listen, therefore, to the disposition that I have to make. It is indeed a tale so strange that I fear you would not credit it if you were not something in truth which, however wonderful, forces sorry, one second. Which, however wonderful, forces conviction. The story is too connected to be mistaken for a dream. I had no motive for falsehood. My manners, and as I thus addressed him, was impressive but calm. I had formed in my own heart a resolution to pursue to my destroyer to death. This purpose quieted my agony for an interval, reconciled me to life. I now related my history briefly, but with firmness and precision, marking the dates with accuracy, and never deviating into invective or explanation. The magistrate appeared at first perfectly incredulous, but as I continued, he became more attentive and interested. I saw him sometimes shudder with horror, at others with live surprise, unmingling with disbelief, and was painted on his countenance. When I concluded my narration, I said, "This is the being whom I accuse, and for whose seizure and punishment I call upon you to exert your whole power. It is your duty as a magistrate, and I believe and hope that your feeling as a man would not revolt from the execution of those functions on this occasion." This address caused a considerable change in the psychonomy of my own auditor. He had heard my story with that half-hearted belief that is given to the tale of spirits and supernatural events. But when he was called upon to act officially in consequence, the whole tide of his incredulity returned. He, however, answered mildly, "I would willingly afford you every aid in your pursuit, but the creature of whom you speak appears to have powers which would put all my exertions to defiance. Who can follow an animal which can traverse the sea of ice and inhabit caves and dens where no man would venture to intrude? Besides, some months have elapsed since the commission of his crimes, and no one can conjecture what place he had wandered or what region he may now inhabit. I do not doubt that he hovers near the spot which I inhabit, and if he has taken refuge in the Alps, he may be hunted like the chamas and destroyed as a beast of prey. But I perceive your thoughts. You do not credit my narrative, and do not intend to pursue my enemy with the punishment which he is desert." As I spoke, rage sparkled in my eyes. The magistrate was intimidated. Sorry, one second, I need some water. There we go. "You are mistaken," said he. "I will exert myself, and if it is in my power to seize the monster, be assured that he shall suffer punishment proportionate to his crimes. But I fear, from what you have yourself described to be his properties, that this will prove impractical, and thus, while every proper measure pursued, you should make up your mind to disappointment. That cannot be. But all that I can say will be of little avail. My revenge is of no moment to you, yet, while I allow it to be a vice, I confess that it is devouring and only a passion of my soul. My rage is unspeakable when I reflect this murderer, whom I have turned loose upon society, still exists. You refuse my just demand, but I have one resource, and I devote myself either in my life or death to his destruction." I trembled with excess of agitation. As I said this, there was a frenzy in my manner, and something, I doubt not, of that haughty fierceness which the martyrs of old are said to have possessed. But to a Genevan magistrate, whose mind was occupied by far other ideas than those of devotion and heroism, this elevation of mind had much the appearance of madness. He endeavored to soothe me, as a nurse does a child, and reverted to my tale as the effects of delirium. "Man," he cried, How ignorant art thou in thy pride of wisdom! Cease! You do not know what it is you say. I broke from the house angry, and disturbed to retire to meditate on some other mode of action. End of chapter 23. Right, so there's one chapter left, chapter 24. But this is the longest of the chapters. I don't know why books sometimes do this, where even though like all the chapters are typically like similar length of being like in this instance like 10 pages or so, the last chapter decides to be 25 pages long, which is quite a bit, honestly. Let's see. Alright. Let's get through it. We got it. We got it. Wait, 1 second. Yeah, I've already like spoken through 40 pages, 20 more pages. Let's see. Might take like 40 minutes to get through this. Okay, alright. Let's see how I feel. Because I actually know how the story ends for my class. I know how it ends, so I'm gonna read what I feel is appropriate, and if I feel I need to do spark notes, then we'll do that, just because, I had was meeting with a friend before I started streaming, so, and I was speaking for quite a bit, and, I don't have the strongest voice. I can't speak for, like, forever, otherwise, I don't want to damage my voice, so, we'll see how I feel. We shall see how I feel. Right. Here we go. My present situation was one in which all voluntary thought was swallowed up and lost. I was hurried away by fury. Revenge alone endowed me with strength and composure. It molded my feelings and allowed me to be calculating in calmer periods, when otherwise delirium or death would have been my portion. My first resolution was to quit Geneva forever, my country which, when I was happy and beloved, was dear to me. Now, in my adversity, became hateful. I provided myself with a sum of money, together with a few jewels which had belonged to my mother, and departed. And now my wanderings began, which are to cease but with life. I had traversed a vast portion of the earth, and have endured all the hardships which travellers in the deserts and barbarous countries are wont to meet. How I have lived I hardly know. Many times I have stretched my failing limbs upon the sandy plain and prayed for death, but revenge kept me alive. I dared not die and leave my adversary in being. When I quitted Geneva, my first labor was to gain some clue by which I might trace the steps of my fiendish enemy. But my plan was unsettled, and I wandered many hours round the confines of the town, uncertain what path I should pursue. As night approached, I found myself at the entrance of a cemetery where William, Elizabeth, and my father reposed. I entered it and approached the tomb which marked their graves. Everything was silent except the leaves of the trees, which were gently agitated by the wind. The night was nearly dark, and the scene would have been solemn and affecting even to the uninterested observer. The spirits of the departed seemed to flit around and to cast a shadow, which was felt but not seen. Around the head of the mourner, the deep grief which the scene had at first excited quickly gave way to rage and despair. They were dead, and I lived there. Their murderer also lived, and to destroy him I must drag out my weary existence. I knelt on the grass and kissed the earth with quivering lips, exclaimed, "By the sacred earth on which I kneel, by the shades that wander near me, and by the deep and eternal grief that I feel, I swear, and by thee, O night, and spirits that proceed over thee, to pursue the demon, and cause this misery, until he or I shall perish in mortal conflict. For this purpose, I will preserve my life. To execute this dear revenge, will I again behold the sun, and tread the green herbage of earth, which otherwise should vanish from my eyes forever. And I call on you, spirits of the dead, and on you, wandering ministries of vengeance, to aid and conduct me in my work. Let the cursed and hellish monster drink deep of agony. Let him feel the despair that now torments me." I had begun my adjuration with solemnity and an awe which almost assured me that the shades of my murdered friends heard and approved my devotion. But the fury possessed me, as I concluded, and rage choked my utterance. I was answered through the stillness of night by a loud and fiendish laugh. It rang on my ears long and heavily. The mountains re-echoed it, and I felt as if all hell had surrounded me with mockery and laughter. Surely in that moment I should have been possessed by frenzy and have destroyed my miserable existence, but that my vow was heard, and that I was reserved for vengeance. The laugh died away, and when a well-known and abhorred voice, apparently close to my ear, addressed me with an audible whisper. I am satisfied, miserable wretch. You have determined to live, and I am satisfied. 1 second, please. Sorry, I just had to blow my nose. I darted towards the spot from which the sound proceeded, but the devil eluded my grasp. Suddenly, the broad disk of the moon arose, and shone full upon his ghastly and distorted shape as he fled with more than mortal speed. I pursued him for many months. This had been my task. Guided by a slight clue, I followed the windings of Rhone, but vainly. The blue Mediterranean appeared, and by a strange chance, I saw the fiend enter by night, and hide himself in the vessel bound for the Black Sea. I took my passage in the same ship, but he escaped. I do not know how. Amidst the wiles of Tartary and Russia, although he still evaded me, have I ever followed his trap. Sometimes the peasants, scared by this horrid apparition, informed me of his path. Sometimes he himself, who feared that I might lose all trace of him, I should despair and die, left some marks to guide me. The snow descended on my head, and I saw the print of his huge step on the white plain. To you further entertaining on life, to whom care is new and agony unknown, how can you understand what I have felt, and still feel? Cold, want, and fatigue were the least pains which I destined to endure. I was cursed by some devil, and carried about with me some eternal hell. Yet still, the spirit of good followed, and directed my steps when I most murmured would suddenly extract me from seemingly insurmountable difficulties. Sometimes when nature, overcome by hunger, sank under the exhaustion, a repast was prepared for me in the desert that restored me and inspired me. The fare was indeed coarse, such as the peasants of the country ate, but I will not doubt that it was set there by the spirits that I had invoked to aid me. Often, when all was dry, the heavens cloudless, and I was parched by thirst, the slight cloud would bedeem the sky, that a few drops would revive me, and vanish. I followed what I could. The course of the river, but as the demon generally avoided these, as it was here that the population of the country chiefly collected, in other places human beings were seldom seen. I generally subsisted on the wild animals that crossed my path. I had money with me, and gained the friendship of villagers by distributing it, and I brought with me some food that I had killed, which, after taking a small part, I always presented to those who had provided me with fire and utensils for cooking. My life as it passed thus was, indeed, hateful to me. It was during my sleep alone that I could taste joy. Oh, blessed sleep! Often when most miserable, I sank to repose. My dreams lulled me even to the rapture. The spirits that guarded me had provided me these moments, or rather hours of happiness, that I should retain strength to fulfill my pilgrimage. Deprived of this respite, I should have sunk under my hardships. During the day, I was sustained by and spirited by the hope of the night, for in sleep I saw my friends, my wife, my beloved country. Again I saw the benevolent countenance of my father. I heard the silver tones of my Elizabeth's voice, and beheld Clerval enjoying his health and youth. Often when wearied by a toilsome march, I persuaded myself that I was dreaming, until the night should come and that I should enjoy reality in the arms of my dearest friends. What agonizing fondness did I feel for them! How did I cling to the dearest forms, as sometimes they haunted even my waking hours, and persuaded myself that I still lived. At such moments, the vengeance that burned within me died in my heart. I pursued my path towards the destruction of the demon, more as a task enjoyed by heaven, and the mechanical impulse of some power which I was unconscious. than of the ardent desire of my soul. But his feelings for whom I pursued I cannot know. Sometimes, indeed, he left marks in writing on barks of trees, or cut in stone that guided some instinct of my fury. My reign is not yet over. These words were legible in one of these inscriptions. You live, and my power is complete. Follow me. I seek the everlasting ices of the north, where you will feel the misery of cold and frost, to which I am impassive. You will find near this place, if you follow not too tardily, a dead hare. Eat, and be refreshed. Come on, my enemy. We have yet to wrestle for our lives, but many hard and miserable hours you must endure until that period shall arrive. Scoffing devil, again do I vow vengeance, again do I devote thee, miserable fiend, to torture and death. Never will I give up my search until he or I perish. And with what ecstasy shall I join my Elizabeth and my departed friends, who even now prepare me the reward of my tedious toil and my horrible pilgrimage. As I still pursued my journey to the northward, the snow thickened and the cold increased in a degree almost too severe to support. The peasants were shut up in their hovels, and only a few of the most hardy ventured forth to seize the animals whom starvation had forced from their hiding places to seek for prey. The rivers were covered with ice, no fish could be procured, and thus I was cut off from my chief article of maintenance. The triumph of my enemy increased with the difficulty of my labors. One inscription that he left was these words: Prepare, your toils only begin. Wrap yourself in furs, and provide food, for we shall soon enter upon a journey where your sufferings will satisfy my everlasting hatred. My courage and preservation was invigorated by these scoffing words. I resolved not to fail in my purpose. Calling on the heaven to support me, I continued with an unabated fervor to traverse immense deserts, until the oceans appeared at a distance and formed the utmost boundary of the horizon. Oh, how unlike it was to the blue seasons of the south. Covered with ice, it was only to be distinguished from land by its superior wilderness and ruggedness. The Greeks wept for joy as when they beheld the Mediterranean from the hills of Asia, and hailed with rapture the bounty of their corals. I did not weep, but knelt down, and with a full heart thanked my guiding spirit for conducting me in safety to the place where I hoped, notwithstanding my adversary's gripe, to meet and grapple with him. Some weeks before this period, I had procured a sledge and dogs, and thus traversed with snows with inconceivable speed. I know not whether the fiend that possessed the same advantages, but I found that, as I had before, I daily lost ground in pursuit. I now gained on him, so much that when I first saw the ocean, he was but only one day's journey in advance. I hoped to intercept him before he should reach the beach. With new courage, therefore, I pressed on, and in 2 days arrived at a wretched hamlet on the seashore. I inquired of the inhabitants concerning the fiend and gained accurate information. A gigantic monster, they said, had arrived that night before, armed with a gun and many pistols, putting to flight the inhabitants of a solitary cottage through fear of his terrific appearance. He had carried off their store of winter food, and placing it in a sledge to draw which he had seized on a numerous grove of trained dogs. He had harnessed them, and that same night, to the joy of the horror-struck village, had pursued his journey across the sea in a direction that led to no land, and I conjectured he must speedily be destroyed by breaking of the ice or frozen by the eternal frosts. On hearing this information, I suffered a temporary access of despair. He had escaped me. I must commence the destructive and almost endless journey across the mountains of ice of the ocean, amidst cold that few of the inhabitants could long endure, and which I, the native of genial and sunny climate, could not hope to survive. Yet, at the idea that the fiend should live and be triumphant, my rage and vengeance returned, and like a mighty tide, overwhelmed every other feeling. After a slight repose, during which the spirits of the dead hovered round and instigated me to toil and revenge, I prepared for my journey. I exchanged my land sledge for one fashioned for the inequalities of the frozen ocean, and purchased plentiful stock of provisions. I departed from land. I cannot guess how many days have passed since then, but I have endured misery with nothing but this internal sentiment of just retribution, burning within my heart, could have enabled me to support. Immense and rugged mountains of ice often barred my passage. I often heard the thunder of the ground sea, which threatened my destruction. But again, the frost came and made the pass of the sea secure. By the quantity of provisions which I had consumed, I should guess that I had passed 3 weeks in this journey, and the continual protraction of hope returned back upon the heart, often wrung bitter drops of despondency and grief from my eyes. Despair had indeed almost secured her prey, and I should have soon sunk beneath this misery. Once, after the poor animals that conveyed me with incredible toil gained the summit of a sloping ice mountain, and one, sinking under his fatigue, died, I viewed the expanse before me with anguish. And when suddenly my eye caught a dark speck upon the dusty plain, I strained my sight to discover what it could be. I uttered a wild cry of ecstasy when I distinguished the sled and distorted proportions of a well-known form within. Oh, with what a burning gush did hope revisit my heart. Warm tears filled my eyes, and I hastily wiped them away, that I might not intercept the view of I had the demon. But still, my sight was dimmed by the burning drops until, giving way to the emotions that oppressed me, I wept aloud. But this was not the time for delay. I disencumbered the dogs of their dead companion, and gave them a plentiful portion of food. And after an hour's rest, which was absolutely necessary, yet which was bitterly irksome to me, I continued my route. The sled was still visible, nor did I again lose sight of it except at the moment for when a short time some ice rock concealed it with intervening crags. I indeed perceptibly gained on it, and when after nearly 2 days' journey I beheld my enemy at no more than a mile distant, my heart bounded within me. But now when I appeared almost within grasp of my foe, my hopes again were suddenly extinguished. I had lost all trace of him more utterly than I had ever before. A ground sea was heard, and the thunder of his progress, as the waters rolled and slowed beneath me, became every moment more ominous and terrific. I pressed on, but in vain. The wind rose, and the sea roared, and, as with the mighty shock of an earthquake, it split, and crashed with tremendous and overwhelming sound. The work was soon finished. In a few moments of tumultuous sea rolled between me and my enemy, and I was left drifting on a scattered piece of ice that was continually lessening, and thus preparing me for a hideous death. In this manner many appalling hours passed. Several of my dogs died, and I myself was about to sink under the accumulation of distress when I saw your vessel, riding at anchor and holding forth to me hopes of secure in life. I had no conception that vessels ever came so far north, and was astounded at the sight. I quickly destroyed part of my sledge to construct oars, and by the means was enabled, with infinite fatigue, to move my ice raft in the direction of your ship. I had determined, if you were going southward, still to trust myself to the mercy of the seas, rather than to abandon my purpose. I hoped to induce you to grant me a boat with which I could pursue my enemy, but your direction was northwards. You took me on board when my vigor was exhausted, and I should have sunk under my multiplied hardships into death, which I still dread, for my task is unfulfilled. Oh, when will my guiding spirit, in conducting me to the demon, allow me to rest I so much desire? Or must I die and he yet live? If I do, swear to me, Walton, that he shall not escape, that you will seek him, and satisfy my vengeance in his death. I do not ask of you to undertake my pilgrimage to ensure the hardships that I have undergone. No, I am not so selfish. Yet, when I am dead, if he should appear, if The ministers of vengeance should conduct him to you. Swear that he shall not live. Swear that he shall not triumph under my acclamated woes, and survive to add to the list of his dark crimes. He is eloquent and persuasive, and once his words have once his words had even power over my own heart. But trust him not. His soul is as hellish as his form, full of treachery and fiend-like malice. Hear him not. Call on the names of William, Justine, Clerval, Elizabeth, my father, and over the wretched Victor, and thrust your sword into his heart. I will hover near and direct the steel aright. From here is from the perspective of Walton. Walton in continuation, August 26th, 18th century. You have read this strange and terrific story, Margaret, and do you not feel your blood congealed with horror like that which even now curdles mine? Sometimes, seized with agony, he would not continue his tale. At others, his voice broken yet piercing, uttered with difficulty the words so replete with anguish. His fine and lovely eyes were now lighted up with indignation, now subdued to downcast sorrow and quench infinite wretchedness. Sometimes he commanded his countenance and tones and related the most horrible incidents with a tranquil voice, suppressing every mark of agitation. Then, like a volcano, bursting forth, his face would suddenly change to an expression of the wildest rage, as he shrieked out and imprecations of his precursor. His tale is connected and told with an appearance of the simplest truth. Yet I owe to you that the letters of Felix and Safie, which he showed me, and the apparition of the monster seen from our ship, brought to me a greater conviction of truth of his narrative of his assertive asservations. However earnest and connected, such a monster has, then, really existence. I cannot doubt it, yet I am lost in surprise and admiration. Sometimes I endeavor to gain from Frankenstein the particulars of his creature's formation, but on this point he was impenetrable. Are you mad, my friend? Said he, or whither does your senseless curiosity lead you? Would you also create for yourself the world of demoniacal enemy? Peace, peace, learn my miseries, and do not seek to increase your own. Frankenstein discovered that I had made notes concerning his history. He asked to see them, and then he himself corrected and augmented them in many places, but principally in giving the life and spirit to the conversation he held with his enemy. Since you have preserved my narration, said he, I would not a mutilated one should go down on posterity. Thus has a week passed away, while I have listened to the strangest tale that ever imagination formed. My thoughts and every feeling of my soul have been drunk up by the interest for my guest, which his tale and his own elevated gentle manners have created. I wish to soothe him, yet I can console one so infinitely miserable, so destitute of every hope of consolation to live. Oh no, the only hope that he can now know will be when he composes his shattered spirit to peace and death. Yet he enjoys one comfort, the offspring of solitude and delirium. He believes that when in dreams he holds converse with his friends and derives from that communion consultation for his miseries or excitements to his vengeance, that they are not the creations of his fancy, but that beings themselves who visit him from the regions of the remote world. This faith gives a solemnity to his reveries that render them to me almost as imposing and interesting as truth. Our conversations were not always confined to his own history and misfortunes. At every port of general literature he displays unbounded knowledge and a quick and piercing apprehension. His eloquence is forcible and touching, and nor can I hear him when he relates his pathetic incident or endeavors to more passions of pity or love. Without tears, what a glorious creature must have been in the days of his prosperity, when he is thus noble and godlike in ruin. He seems to feel his own worth and the greatness of his fall. When younger, said he, I believed myself destined for some great enterprise. My feelings are profound, but I possess the coolness of judgment that fitted me for illustrious achievement. This sentiment of worth of my nature supported me when others would have opposed, for I deem it criminal to throw away in useless grief those talents that might be useful to my fellow creatures. When I reflected on the work I had completed, no less than one that the creation of sensitive and rational animal, I could not rank myself with the herd of common projectors, but this thought, which supported me in the commencement of my career, now serves only to plunge me in lower. Sorry, only serves only to plunge me in lower in the dust. All my speculations and hopes are as nothing, like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence. I had chained in an eternal hell. My imagination was vivid, yet my powers of analysis and application were intense. By the union of these qualities, I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. Even now, I cannot recollect my passions, my reveries while the work was incomplete. I trod haven in my thoughts, now exulting in my powers, now burning with the idea of their effects. From my infancy, I was imbued with high hopes and a lofty ambition, but how I am sunk. Oh, my friend, if you had known me as I once was, you would not recognize me in the state of degradation. Despondency rarely visited my heart. A high destiny seems to bear on, until I fell, never, never again to rise. Must I lose this admirable being? I have longed for a friend. I have sought one who would sympathize with and love me. Behold, on these desert seas, I have found such a one, but I fear I have tamed him only to know his values and lose him. I would reconcile him to life, but here pulses the idea. I thank you, Walton, he said, for your kind intentions towards such a miserable wretch. When you speak of new ties and fresh affections, think you can any replace those who are gone? Can any man be to me as Clerval was, or any woman another Elizabeth? Even when the affections are not strongly moved by any superior excellence, the companions of our childhood always possess a sort of power over our minds, which hardly a later friend can obtain. They know our infantine dispositions, which, however they may be afterward modified, are never eradicated, and they can judge our actions with more certainty and conclusions as to the integrity of our motives. A sister or a brother can never, unless indeed such symptoms have been shown earlier, suspect the other of fraud or false dealing. When another friend, however strongly he may be attached, may, in spite of himself, be contemplated with suspicion. But I enjoyed friends, dear not only through habit and association, but from their own merits, and wherever I am, the soothing voice of my Elizabeth, and the conversation of Clerval, will be ever whispering in my ear. They are dead, but what feeling in such a solitude can persuade me to preserve my life? If I were engaged in any high undertaking or design fraught with extensive utility to my fellow creatures, then I could live to fulfill it. But such is not my destiny. I must pursue and destroy the being to whom I gave my existence. Then my lot on earth will be fulfilled, and I may die. Alright, and this from here on, it's like a series of letters that Walton is writing. So from here on, September 2nd, my beloved sister, I write to you encompassed by peril and ignorant whether I am ever doomed to see again dear England and the dearer friends that inhabit it. I am surrounded by mountains of ice which admit of no escape and threaten every moment to crush my vessel. The brave fellows who I have persuaded to be my companions look towards me for aid, but I have none to bestow. There is something terribly appalling in our situation, yet my courage and hopes do not desert me. Yet it is terrible to reflect the lives of all the men that are endangered through me. If we are lost, my mad schemes are the cause. And what, Margaret, will be the state of your mind? Will you not hear of my destruction? You will anxiously await my return? Years will pass and you will have visitings of despair and yet be tortured by hope. Oh, my beloved sister, The sickening failings of your heartfelt expectations is, in prospect, more terrible to me than my own death. But you have a husband, and lovely children, and you may be happy. Heaven bless you, and make you so. My unfortunate guest regards me with tenderest compassion. He endeavors to fill me with hope, and talks as if life were a possession which he valued. He reminds me how often the same accidents would have happened to other navigators who have attempted the sea, and in spite of myself, he fills me with cheerful anxieties. Even the sailors feel the power of his eloquence. When he speaks, no longer desire he rouses their energies, and while they hear his voice, they believe the vast mountains of ice are molehills which will vanish before the resolution of man. These feelings are transitory. Each day of expectation delayed fills them with fear. They almost dread a mutiny caused by this despair. September 5th. A scene has just passed of such commotion and interest that, although it is highly probable that these papers may never reach you, yet I cannot forbear recording it. We are still surrounded by mountains of ice, still in immediate danger of being crushed by this conflict. The cold is excessive. Many of my unfortunate comrades have already found a grave amidst this scene of desolation. Frankenstein has daily declined in health. A feverish fire still glimmers in his eyes, but he is exhausted, and when roused to any exertion, he speedily sinks again into apparent lifelessness. I mentioned in my last letter that fears entertained of a mutiny. This morning, as I saw wretched a wane of countenance of my friend, his eyes half closed and his limbs hanging listlessly, I was roused by half a dozen of the sailors, who determined admission into the cabin. They entered, and their leader addressed me. He told me that he and his companions have been chosen by the other sailors to come in deputation to me, to make me a requisition which, in justice, I could not refuse. We are immured in ice, and should probably never escape. But they feared if, as was possible, the ice should dissipate and a free passage be opened, I should be rash and enough to continue my voyage and lead them into fresh dangers after they might happily have surmounted this. They insisted, therefore, that I should engage with a solemn promise that if the vessel should be freed, I would instantly direct my course southward. This speech troubled me. I had not despaired, nor had I conceived the idea of returning if set free. Yet could I excuse me. Yet could I, in justice, or even in possibility, refuse this demand? I hesitated before I answered, when Frankenstein, who had at first been silent, and indeed appeared hardly to have force enough to attend, roused himself. His eyes sparkled, and his cheek flushed with momentary vigor. Turning towards the men, he said, "What do you mean? What do you demand of your captain? Are you, then, so easily turned from your design? Did you not call this a glorious expedition? And wherefore was it glorious? Not because the ways was smooth and placid as the southern sea, but because it was full of dangers and terror, because at every new instant your fortitude was to be called forth, and your courage exhibited, because danger and death surrounded it, and these were your brave to overcome. For this was it an honorable undertaking. You are hereafter to be hailed as the benefactors of your species, your names adored as belonging to brave men who encountered death for honor and the benefit of mankind. And now, behold, with the first imagination of danger, or, if you will, the first mighty and terrific trial of your courage, you shrink away and are content to be handed down as men who had not strength enough to endure cold and peril. And so, poor souls, they were chilly and returned to the warm firesides. Why, that requires not this preparation. Ye need not have come this far and drag your captain to the shame of a defeat merely to prove yourself cowards. Oh, be men, or be more than men. Be steady on your purposes, and be firm as a rock. This ice is not made of such stuff as your hearts may be. It is mutable, and cannot withstand you if you say it is not shall. Do not return to your families with the stigma of disgrace marked on your brows. Return as heroes who have fought and conquered, and who know not what it is to turn their backs on the foe." He spoke with his voice so modulated to the different feelings expressed in his speech, with an eye so full of a lofty design and heroism that can you wonder that these men were moved? They looked at one another and were unable to reply. I spoke. I told them to retire and consider of what has been said. I would not lead them farther north if they strenuously desire the contrary, but I hope that, with reflection, their courage will return. They retired and I turned towards my friend, but he was sunk in languor and almost deprived of life. How will this all terminate? I know not, but I'd rather die than return shamefully. My purpose is unfulfilled, yet I fear such will be my fate. The men, unsupported by ideas of glory and honor, can never willingly continue to endure their present hardship. September 7th. The die is cast. I have consented to One second. I have consented to return if we were not destroyed. Thus are the hopes blasted by cowardice and indecision. I come back ignorant and disappointed. It requires more philosophy than I possess to bear this injustice with patience. September 12th. It is past. I am returning to England. I have lost my hopes of utility and glory. I have lost my friend. But I will endeavor to detail these bitter circumstances to you, dear sister. While I am wafted towards England and towards you, I will not despond. September 9th, the ice began to move, and roarings like thunder we heard at a distance, the islands split and crack in every direction. We were in most imminent peril, but as we could only remain passive, my chief attention was occupied by my unfortunate guest, whose illness increased to such a degree he was entirely confounded to his bed. 1 second, please. Sorry, my model was being screwy. It's fine. Confined to his bed. The ice cracked beneath us and was driven with force towards the north. Why is my head tilting? I'm not even tilting my head. Sorry about that. A breeze sprang from the west. On the 11th of the passage towards the south became perfectly free. When the sailors saw this, and that their return to their native country was apparently assured, a shout of tremendous joy broke from them, and long continued. Frankenstein, who was dozing, awoke and asked the cause of the tumult. They shout, I said, because they will soon return to England. Do you, then, really return? Alas, yes. I cannot withstand their demands, and I cannot lead them unwillingly to danger, and I must return. Do so, if you will, but I will not. You may give up your purpose, but mine is assigned to me by heaven, and I dare not. I am weak, but surely the spirits who assist my vengeance will endow me with sufficient strength. Saying this, he endeavored to spring from the bed, but the exertion was too great for him. He fell back and fainted. It was long before he was restored, and I often thought that life was entirely extinct. At length he opened his eyes. He breathed with difficulty and was unable to speak. The surgeon gave him a composing draught and ordered us to leave him undisturbed. In the meantime, he told me that my friend had certainly not many hours to live. His sentence was pronounced. I can only grieve and be patient. I sat by his bed, watching him. His eyes were closed, and I thought he slept, but presently he called to me in a feeble voice, and bidding me to come near, said, Alas, the strength I relied on is gone, and I feel I should soon die. And he, my enemy, my persecutor, my still being being. Think not, Walton, that in the last moments of my existence I feel that burning hatred, an ardent desire of revenge I once expressed, but I feel myself justified in desiring the death of my adversary. During these last days, I have been accompanied in examining my past conduct, nor do I find it blamable. In a fit of enthusiastic madness, I created a rational creature, and was bound toward him to assure, as far as was in my power, his happiness and well-being. This was my duty, but there was still another paramount to that. My duties towards the beings of my own species had greater claims to my attention, because they included a greater portion of happiness or misery. Urged by this view, I refused, and I did right in refusing, to create a companion for the fierce creature. He showed unparalleled malignity and selfishness and evil. He destroyed my friends. He devoted to destruction beings who possessed exquisite sensations, happiness and wisdom, nor do I know where this thirst for vengeance may end. Miserable himself that he may render no other wretched. He ought to die. The task of his destruction was mine, but I have failed. When actuated by selfish and vicious motives, I asked you to undertake my finished work. I renounce this request now, when I am only induced by reason and virtue. Yet I cannot ask that you renounce your country and friends to fulfill this task, and now that you are returning to England, you will have little chance of meeting with him. But the considerations of these points and what well balancing what you may esteem to your duties, I leave to you. My judgments and ideas are already disturbed by the near approach of death. I dare not ask you to do what I think right, for I may still be misled by passion. That he should live to be an instrument of mischief disturbs me. In other respects, this hour, when I momentarily expect my release, is only a happy one, which I have enjoyed for several years. The forms of the beloved dead fit before me, and I hasten to their arms. Farewell, Walton. Seek happiness and tranquility, and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparent innocent one of you distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. Yet, why do I say this? I have myself been blasted in these hopes, yet another may succeed. His voice became fainter as he spoke, and at length, exhausted by his effort, he sank into silence. About half an hour afterwards, he attempted again to speak, but was unable. He pressed my hand feebly, and his eyes closed forever, while the irradiation of a gentle smile passed away from his lips. Margaret, what comment can I make on the untimely extinction of this glorious spirit? What can I say that will enable you to understand the depths of my sorrow? All that should I express would be inadequate and feeble. My tears flow, and my mind is overshadowed by a cloud of disappointment. But I journey towards England, and there I might find consultation. I am interrupted. What sounds portend? It is midnight. The breeze flows fairly, and the watch on the deck scarcely stir. Again there is a sound of a human voice, but hoarser. It comes from the cabin where the remains of Frankenstein still lie. I must arise and examine. Good night, my dear sister. Several moments pass. Great God! What a scene has just taken place! I am yet dizzy with the remembrance of it. I hardly know whether I shall have the power to detail it, yet the tale which I have recorded will be incomplete without this final and wonderful catastrophe. I entered the cabin, where there lay the remains of my ill-fated and admirable friend. Over him hung a form which I cannot find words to describe, gigantic in stature, yet uncouth and distorted in its proportions. As he hung over the coffin, his face was concealed by long locks of ragged hair, but one vast hand was extended, the color and apparent texture like that of a mummy. When he heard the sound of my approach, he ceased to utter exclamations of grief and horror, and sprung towards the window. Nor did I behold a vision so terrible as his face. of such a loathsome yet appalling hideousness. I shut my eyes involuntarily and endeavored to recount what were my duties to regard to this destroyer. I called on him to stay. He paused, looked on me with wonder, and again towards the lifeless form of his creator. He seemed to forget my presence, and every feature and gesture seemed instigated by the wildest rage of some uncontrollable passion. "That is also my victim," he exclaimed. In his murder, my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my beings is wound too close. Oh, Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I, who irretrievably destroyed thee, by destroying all thou lovest. Alas, he is cold. He cannot answer me. His voice seems suffocated, and a few impulses, which had suggested to me the duty of obeying the dying request of my friend in observing his enemy, were now suspended by a mixture of curiosity and compassion. I approached the tremendous being. I dared not again raise my eyes to his face. There was something so scarring and unearthly about his ugliness. I attempted to speak, but the words died away on my lips. The monster continued to utter wild and incoherent self-reproaches. At length I gathered resolution to address him, in a pause and of temps of his passion. "Your repentance," I said, "is now superfluous. If you had listened to the voice of conscience and heeded the stings of remorse before you had urged your diabolical vengeance to this extremity, Frankenstein would yet have lived." "And do you dream?" said the demon. "Do you think that I was then dead to agony and remorse? He continued, pointing to the corpse, he suffered not in the consummation of the dead, in the conception of the deed. Oh, not to 10,000th portion of the anguish that was mine during the lingering detail of his execution." A frightful selfishness hurried me on. While my heart was poised with remorse, think you that the groans of Clerval were music to my ears? My heart was fashioned to be susceptible of love and sympathy, and when wretched by misery to vice and hatred, it did not endure the violence as the change was torture such that you cannot even imagine. After the murder of Clerval, I returned to Switzerland, heartbroken and overcome. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror. I abhorred myself. When I discovered that he, the author at once of my existence, of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in feelings of passion from the indulgence of which I was forever barred. That impotent envy and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. I recollected my threat, and resolved that it should be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing for myself a deadly torture, but I was a slave, not a master, of an impulse which I detest yet could not obey. Yet when she died, nay, then I was not miserable. I cast off all feeling, subdued all anguish, to ride in excess of my despair. Evil, then force, became my good. Urged this far, I had no choice but to adapt my nature to the element which I had willingly chosen. The completion of my demoniacal design had become an insatiable passion, and now it has ended. There is my last victim. At first I was touched by the expressions of his misery, yet when I called to mind what Frankenstein had said of his powers of eloquence and persuasion, and when again I cast my eyes on the lifeless form of my friend, indignation was rekindled within me. "Wretch," I said, "it is well that you come here to whine over the desolation that you have made. You throw a torch into a pile of buildings, and when they are consumed, you sit among the ruins and lament their fall. Hypocritical fiend! If he whom you mourn still lived, still would he be the object. Again, would he be the prey of your accursed vengeance. It is not pity that you feel. You only lament because the victim of your malignity is withdrawn from your power. Oh, It is not thus, interrupted the being. Yet, such must be the impression conveyed to you by what appears to be the purport of my actions. Yet I seek not the fellow feeling of my misery. No sympathy may I ever find. When I first sought it, it was the love of virtue, the feelings of happiness and affection, of which my whole being overflowed, that I wished to be participation. But now the virtue has become to me a shadow, and that happiness and affection are turned into bitter and loathing despair. And what should I ask for your sympathy? I am content to suffer alone, while my suffering shall endure. When I die, I am well satisfied that abhorrence and opprobrium should load my memory. Once my fancy was soothed with dreams of virtue, of fame, of enjoyment. Once I falsely hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of unfolding. I was nourished with the thoughts of honor and devotion, but now crime has degraded me beneath the meanest animal. No guilt, no mischief, no malignity, no misery can be found comparable to mine. When I run over the frightful catalogue of my sins, I cannot believe that I am the same creature whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of the beauty and majesty of goodness. But it is even so. The fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Yet even the enemy of God and the man has friends and associates in his desolation. I am alone. You, who you call Frankenstein your friend, seem to have knowledge of my crimes and his misfortunes, but in the details which he gave you of them, you could not sum up the hours and months of misery which I endured wasting in unprintable passions, for which, while I had destroyed my hopes, I did not satisfy my own desires. They were forever ardent and craving still. I desired love and fellowship. And when I was still spurred, was there no injustice in this? I am thought to be only a criminal, but when all humankind sinned against me, why do you not feel hate, Felix? Who drove his friend from his door with contumely? Why do you not execrate the rustic who sought to destroy the Savior of his child? Nay, these are virtuous and immaculate beings. I, the miserable and abandoned, am an abortion, to be spurned at, and kicked and trampled on. Even now my blood boils at the recollection of this injustice. But it is true that I am a wretch. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept, and grasped to death his throat, who never injured me or any other living thing. I have devoted my Creator, the select specimen of all that is worthy of love and admiration among men, to misery. I have pursued him even to the irremediable ruin. There he lies, white and cold in death. You hate me, but your abhorrence cannot equal that which I regard myself. I look on the hands which executed the deed. I think on the heart in which the imagination of which was conceived, and long for the moment of these hands, which will meet my eyes, when the imagination will haunt my thoughts no more. Fear not that I shall be the instrument of future mischief. My work is nearly complete. Neither yours nor any man's death is needed to consummate the series of my being, and accomplish that which must be done, but it requires my own. Do not think that I shall be slow to perform the sacrifice. I shall quit your vessel on the ice raft which brought me thither, and shall seek the most northern extremity of the globe. I shall collect my funeral pile, and consume to ashes this miserable frame, that its remains may afford no light to any curious and unhallowed wretch who would create such another as I have been. I shall die. I shall no longer feel the agonies which now consume me, or be the prey of feelings unsatisfied yet unquenched. He is dead. Call me into being, and when I shall be no more, the very remembrance of us both will speedily vanish. I shall no longer see the sun, or stars, or feel the winds play on my cheeks. Light, feeling, and senses will pass away. And in this condition, must I find my happiness? Some years ago, when the images which this world affords first opened up to me, when I felt the cheering warmth of summer and heard the rustling of the leaves and the warbling of the birds, and these were all to me, I should have wept to die, and now it is my only consolation. Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterness of remorse, where can I rest but in death? Farewell, I leave you, and in you the last of humankind, whom these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert yet alive, and yet cherished a desire of revenge against me, it would be better satiated in my life than in my destruction. But it was not so. Thou did not seek my extinction, that I might not cause greater wretchedness, and if yet in some mode unknown to me, thou hast not ceased to think and feel, thou would not desire against me a vengeance greater than which I feel. Blasted art thou, wert, and my agony was still superior to thine, for the bitter sting of remorse will not cease to rankle in my wounds until death shall close them forever. But soon, he cried with a sad and solemn enthusiasm, I shall die, and what I now feel will be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly, and exult in the agony of the torturing flames. The light of conflagration will fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace. Or, if it thinks, it will not surely think thus. Farewell. He sprang from the cabin window as he said this, upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves, and lost in darkness and distance. The end. And that was Frankenstein. Right, so, it's done. I got through it. We got through it. Good on us, good on us. Ah, oh, my hands are like shaking for some reason. I think that's a sign that I need to go eat some food. Yep. But yeah, I'm glad I finally finished the book. It's done. No longer have to worry about the fucking old English man. But yeah, I mean, I definitely want to continue like reading on stream because I actually really enjoy reading, and I can use as practice as a way to improve my speaking voice essentially. I definitely have other books and stories I would love to read on stream, and hell, if anyone ever wants to give me suggestions, I would greatly appreciate it. But yeah, I suppose I should end here. I wonder if I should rate anyone. I mean, no one's watching me, but I don't know. It's a thought that counts. It's a thought that can be seen. Let's see who's online. Who is online? 1 second, please. 1 second. Let's see. Rise is online. Maybe I should go send some love to her. Yeah, I probably should go send some love to Rise. Yeah, she always likes to stop by, which I greatly appreciate. So, yeah. Yeah, I should give her. Yeah, I should go raid her. Let's do that. Okay, 1 second, please. Raid channel. Oh, here we go. Rise. Here we go. Right then, so, we're right before a raid. So, if anyone ever watches VOD in the future, greatly appreciated. I hope that my shitty reading of Frankenstein was somewhat enjoyable, but otherwise, this is gonna be Valley Song signing out. Have a damn good one, y'all, and take care. Ciao,